It's created this shared view of how law firms operate that has never existed before. And unfortunately, a good chunk of the time, it just raises more questions. We're like, okay, this is happening. We see it. Why? And so, in order to help with that, one of the things we do is we do add surveys of both lawyers and clients to help maybe figure out the why of what we're seeing. And this is one of the areas where I also contribute pretty heavily as well, is I'll work with the data scientist to take a look at numbers and try to hypothesize based on what I know about running a law firm. Why are we seeing this data? And why is it maybe supporting our hypothesis or disproving a hypothesis that we've worked along the way? Once we start to see obvious mathematical trends and have some good insight into why we think those trends are happening.
The clip that you're about to see is from a longer conversation that I had about a key factor that is stopping or helping law firms experience more freedom and more success. So, in this conversation, I sat down with Joshua Lenon, who is the lawyer in residence at Clio. If you're not familiar with Clio, let me give you a little bit of idea. Clio is the number one cloud-based practice management software for small and mid-sized law firms. And they're constantly up to great things. And one of the things that I really love that they do is this thing called the Legal Trends Report. And that's where they look at thousands, tens of thousands of law firms, and they look at the data and they pull out very interesting data points to help you understand, like, hey, here's what's happening on average. Things like what are the average billable rates and prices that law firms are charging by state. It also looks at, hey, what are some of the common KPIs across large, mid-sized, solo, and small firms to help you get a better benchmark of how you compare to the industry. And also, they share some really good tips about what firms are doing to actually see better results. And in this conversation, we broke down a lot of great things that we talked about, that we dived in, that I think are very useful for law firm owners. And this ties into our theme for the month of July of freedom, because one of the very important keys to enjoying more freedom and success in your firm is having access to the right information. Because when you have access to the right information, it then allows you to understand, hey, how are we doing? It allows you to understand and assess your progress so that you have the signs and the data points to know, hey, where do we need to make some adjustments so that we can get better results? Because at the end of the day, what you will realize is being more successful and more having more freedom in your firm really comes down to a few small key areas. And if you have access to the right data, it will make it a lot easier for you to make those changes to really get to the destination that you want to be in your law firm. So enjoy this clip. We're going to be sharing several of them that will really dive into some of the really key points. But if you want to watch the entire conversation that we did, which is about 40 minutes, it'll be on our YouTube channel or on the podcast. So you can listen to the entire conversation. But we pulled out some really good clips that I think are going to really help you make some smart decisions and better understand what you can do to help increase your chances of success in your law firm. So stay tuned and enjoy this clip. Now, one of the things about being successful is being able to use data and information and industry trends to help you make effective decisions. So, we brought on one of our favorite guests. He's been on the show multiple times as we've talked about great things around the industry and the trends. So, I want to bring on the lawyer in residence for Clio, my friend Joshua Lenon. Welcome back, Josh. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always great to have our conversations. I really enjoy them.
Absolutely. I really admire the work that you and your team do to really put together these trends reports where you're looking across hundreds and thousands of different law firms to say, hey, what are the trends that we are seeing? And so I'm always grateful that you make the time to come on the show to talk about it when you guys release a new report.
Thank you. Yeah, Clio has been publishing our legal trends report annually since 2016, and it definitely is a team effort that makes this happen. So while I'm lucky enough to come and get to explain some of the things that we've discovered, I do want to give credit to the whole team of people who work alongside me: data scientists, writers, visual designers. There's a whole group of people who are working to use Clio's really unique data set to find what's working for law firms in legal technology and sharing that in a whole variety of places. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to showcase the hard work of my team.
Absolutely. Now, I know people may have heard this conversation or they may have heard about legal trends and they're like, I'm familiar with the really big report that comes out once a year. Not too long ago, you guys really took on a step of saying, hey, how do we go even a step further? And you guys have added more than just the one big annual report. So, for those that may not be familiar with the other versions of the trends report, can you give them a little bit of context on the different types of trends reports that Clio releases?
Absolutely. So again, we release our main report, the just what we call the Legal Trends Report, or LTR as our shorthand for it, every autumn as a part of the Clio Con, our Clio conference. And it's coming up in Boston, October this year. But then in addition to that main report, we release two others. One that focuses on mid-sized law firms, which we define as 20 or more lawyers, and another one that takes a look at solo and small law firms. So up to 5 users or lawyers within the law firms themselves. And we definitely see differences when we drill down into these specific groups of types of law firms, how they're operating, what tools they're using, how they're spending. All of these things become different when you focus in on these groups. Earlier this year, we released our legal trends report for mid-sized law firms, and we just released our legal trends reports for small law firms. So no matter what size firm you run or are planning to run, we've got some information that we hope will be helpful for you.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea because even for myself, as I work with different firms, I do realize that depending on the size, the context of the advice that's given does change a bit. And I do that you guys have broken that out. So I guess can you give people a quick context on what the process looks like I said, you got data scientists involved, you got writers, you got graphic designers. You even have some of your consultants and partners involved. So, can you give people a little context about how this project comes together? And then we can dive into what were some of the interesting things in the reports this year.
You got it. The legal trends report, as I said, is really unique because of the data that we have. And that data comes from Clio's own customers. Now, I can hear everybody tensing up when I say that. But when I say the data comes from Clio's own customers, what I'm talking about is not your case files, your client information, but instead usage statistics in Clio itself, right? What settings are you turning on or off, right? How often are you clicking and loading a web page within Clio? Those are the types of things that we monitor for performance reasons, right? Making sure Clio works. But we can also see this kind of high level, anonymized, aggregated view of how law firms are operating. And as Clio has grown and become more widely used, it's given us just more and more insight into what's going on out there. So you mentioned that it's like hundreds or thousands. It's actually tens of thousands of law firms and legal professionals choosing to contribute this data. You can always opt out, but because we've seen such a positive kind of reinforcement of some of the things that we've discovered, things that have helped law firms as we publish them, we see just more and more firms choosing to contribute and be a partner with us. So these firms are sending us these usage statistics, this anonymized aggregated data, and it's created this shared view of how law firms operate that has never existed before. And unfortunately, a good chunk of the time, it just raises more questions. We're like, okay, this is happening. We see it. Why? And so in order to help with that, one of the things we do is we do add surveys of both lawyers and clients to help maybe figure out the why of what we're seeing. And this is one of the areas where I also contribute pretty heavily as well is I'll work with the data scientist to take a look at numbers and try to hypothesize based on what I know about running a law firm. Why are we seeing this data? And why is it maybe supporting our hypothesis or disproving a hypothesis that we've worked along the way? Once we start to see obvious mathematical trends and have some good insight into why we think those trends are happening, that's when we turn to our writers and our visual designers, because nobody wants to look at just a bunch of spreadsheets, to be perfectly honest, when you're trying to learn these types of things. And so we really do try to bring the information in a visual design format that tells its own story and makes it obvious when we see like changes over time, or help you really understand how to compare like apples and oranges. And so that is the team all working together to make sure that we don't just understand these huge numbers that we're looking at, but we understand the why of them and how best to communicate them. And that's the legal trends report. We've also done some really interesting things over the years. We've done secret shoppers where we've hired people to go out, reach out to law firms as a potential client. That was part of this year's report. It's the second time we've done that. And we've also partnered with outside consultants. There are lots of really great services that help law firms like your own. And for our recent legal trends report, we actually partnered with one of our Clio certified consultants, CPN Legal, in order to access a different type of anonymized aggregated data through CPN's customers. It speaks really highly to the trust and the service that CPN provides, that when they reached out to their customers and said, hey, we're partnering with Clio, we want to share some anonymized aggregated data with them, her customers at CPN Legal just said, yes, oh yeah, we trust you. You wouldn't give them anything you shouldn't. And we trust Clio to protect the information that they have and publish it in a responsible way. And that led to some really interesting insights this year into the historical spending patterns of law firms that we've never had access to before. So there's a lot that goes on to this. And it really has become a year-round project for me and a whole bunch of my teammates here at Clio.
Nice. I'm looking forward to just diving into a couple of things. Let's start from as we look into the legal trends report, as the research was done, what were some of the big takeaways as you went through the data? So if someone's going to pick up the legal trends report, what should they be expecting as, hey, here's the big takeaway. You're going to see a lot in the trends reports.
Yeah, there's the things that we publish every year, our key performance indicators, and those take a look at what's the average hourly rate for lawyers, which right now is right around $340 an hour. What's the average hourly rate for non-lawyers? And that's right around $193 per hour. And how do the growth of those hourly fee rates over time compare against inflation? And what we see is that lawyer rates definitely keep at or above inflation, but billing rates for non-lawyers are actually far below it in
Wow.
terms of keeping up. Yeah. And so it's a drag on law firm sustainability if you're not taking a look at your non-lawyer billable hour rates and making sure that they account for inflation and the drag that it puts upon your law firm's bottom line. We also every year take a look at lockup, which is the idea of the firm's earned revenue being locked up someplace that it shouldn't, either as an unbilled work in progress time or as an uncollected amount of revenue because the clients just haven't paid you yet. And what we see in Clio using law firms is that the median lockup between those two is right around 92 days, about 3 months. So that means a law firm is generally operating at a quarter behind where they should be fiscally. And what little steps can you take to shorten that and make sure that the money that you've earned is locked up in your bank account rather than in this unbilled time or uncollected state? And then this year we looked at 4 other different topics. We took a look at the further increased use of artificial intelligence in law firms and its potential impact on billed revenue. We took a look at the historical financial data that we were talking about before, and what are law firms really spending their money on? We then did a secret shopper experiment where we reached out to 500 random law firms. They weren't all Clio customers, with highly targeted potential client like shopping. And the results were really bad, to be perfectly honest. And then lastly, for the first time ever, we took a look at flat fees, right? And how are flat fees really starting to become a much more prevalent part of legal billing than we've seen in the past. So there's a lot in these reports. But again, just new insight every year, which I'm always excited by.
Nice. So I want to start with what you mentioned about the average rates. So, like the rates for attorney, the rates for non-attorneys, how based on the data, it looks law firms are adjusting the rate or what they're billing out for attorneys, but they're not doing it at a rate that it keeps up with inflation for non-attorneys. Was
That's right.
there
It seems
anything
really
in
flat over time.
wow. Was there anything in the surveys that gave any indication or any hypothesis of that came out about why law firms may not be as attentive to the rates for non-attorneys?
One of the things that's very interesting is who's using non-lawyer timekeepers. And when we split out these mid-sized law firms from the rest, what we see is they are much more likely to be using non-lawyer timekeepers. In fact, when it comes to active users on a matter, like close to 50% of mid-sized law firm timekeepers are these non-lawyer roles, paralegals, legal secretaries. And so what we see from some clients is a little bit of pushback on paying hourly rates for a non-licensed professional. And that might be a little bit of a drag on this. But honestly, I think it's probably just the law firm itself being worried that they can't charge enough for this. And I'm basing this on one of our key performance indicators that we take a look at is realization rate. In a visual design that we call the lawyer funnel, we take a look at how much time in a day lawyers are spending on billable work, and we call that a utilization rate. And then from that recorded billable time, how much of that ends up on the bill? All right. And we call that our realization rate. And then finally, the last one in the funnel is the collection rate. How much of that time that ends up on the bill is getting paid? And firms of different sizes have vastly different utilization rates. That top one. Solos spend less time on billable work than lawyers in mid-sized law firms. And it's not surprising to me, right? Because you can hand off administrative work in these larger law firms. But the realization rate that I was mentioning before is the one metric that is in 100% control of the law firm. I've recorded billable time. Am I putting it now on the bill? And what we see is it tends to hover right around 88% is the realization rate. Lawyers are giving themselves a 10 to 12% haircut on billed revenue. And the reason that they've told us in terms of surveys are either empathy for the client, this is too much, they can't afford it, or fear of the client pushing back and telling them not to pay it. And so I think it's that later one with non-lawyers that we're seeing a lot of is that they're just worried that what if I raise my paralegal rate to over $200 an hour, which is where it should probably be based on inflation over time, they're worried about pushback and not being able to collect on it. But given that clients are going to push back on a bill no matter how big it is, right? You should at least put all your time on there and put in a rate that helps your firm be sustainable. That's what I think is going on there. Is I think they're keeping it low because they're worried about what the clients will say, not that work is less valuable and therefore they shouldn't charge for it.
Wow. I think that is something for all of the law firms that are listening to the conversation is that's something that definitely they should put some serious thought to of how you're handling your rates for attorneys or non-attorney roles and really put some serious strategy to it. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. And I also wanted to ask about the lockup. So when you
Mhm.
mentioned about kind of average days, 92 days. So, you know, just to provide some context on that, or ask a question to provide some context. So if a firm has a lockup of 92 days, so in theory, does that mean that this is money that they've done the legal work, they've earned the money, but for whatever reason, there's some delay, whether it's invoicing or whether it's collections, that money is sitting in someone else's bank account for an average of 92 days?
So it's not that the money's actually someplace else for 92 days. What we're looking at is that 92 days worth of your firm's annual revenue is just
Gotcha.
not accessible for whatever
Okay.
reason. And so lockup in this instance is calculated based on annual revenue,
Mhm.
calculated by days. All right. So you have 352 days. But what we've seen with the top performing law firms when it comes to median, so you're like your top 75% or your top 25%, your 75th percentile on up, is that they definitely have processes and technology that is able to shrink the number of days revenue that they just don't have access to.
Right.
And having access to this money prevents you from having to turn to things like a line of credit or
Mhm.
credit cards or having your partners have to contribute more capital. It just keeps cash in the bank. So when we talk about days, it's not that I bill on January 1st, I get paid on April 2nd. I
Mhm.
think that's about 92 days. What it is that of my firm's annual revenue, I'm missing about 3 months at any point in time.
Wow.
And I'm going to have to cover that missing revenue for up to 3 months, right? If I can't get my act together. And
Wow.
so things that firms have been doing that improve their lockup is billing more frequently, right? Don't let your this earned revenue sit as this unrecorded, unbilled time. Get it recorded, get it on a bill, get that bill to the client. And we've seen firms that use methods like emailing bills to clients, having a drop in lockup on their work in progress lockup because they just get it out there. And so they're not waiting on themselves anymore. And then we've
Mhm.
seen firms that are using different types of payment methods like electronic payments, right? Be it credit card, debit card, e-check. Not only are they getting paid faster overall, but they're seeing their collection lockup drop in terms of number of days. And so we've seen some firms and the really top performers who go from that median of 92 days are able to drop it down to about a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that's basically 2 months of revenue that they have access throughout the year whenever they need it to cover rent, to cover salary, to buy a photocopier, to actually pay out to as part of your quarterly profits and distributions to your partners, right? There's lots that's good by having this type of revenue locked up in your bank account, and the faster you can get that process going, the better.
Nice. So again, for law firms that are listening, if especially if you're a law firm that where the partners are having to contribute money, or the firm is having to take out loans, or you have high balances on your credit card, it might be good to understand, what does your lockup look like, because that might be a clue of an opportunity for some improvement in your firm. So thanks for explaining that a little bit more for us, that may for people who may not be as familiar with lockup. So keeping in line with that vein on some of the financial metrics, you mentioned about partnering with some of the Clio certified partners and consultants, and being able to looking at kind of financial trends of where firms are spending their money. So, anything jump out to you as you guys looked at that anonymized data to see,
Mhm.
hey, what are some of the trends we're seeing here?
Yeah, we were really lucky when we partnered with CPN Legal. One, they're just really good at what they do. And one of the things they do is they help firms set up their accounting systems. And so the firm's data that they were able to collate and anonymize and share with us was all really highly organized, which is like one of the first things that was really lucky for us, right? Because if you've ever worked with any number of spreadsheets, they're always messy and nothing's in the same spot. And so we just didn't have that problem with them. The second thing that we got really lucky on is they've been doing this for a while. So we were actually able to gain historical views going back all the way until the 1990s in some
Oh,
instances.
wow.
Yeah. And we actually couldn't use data that long ago in our analysis because we just didn't have enough law firms that had available records from the 1990s to compare against. And so you got to have a big sample. But even looking all the way back to 2008, which is what we did, we saw some really interesting spending patterns and changes over time. And one of the things that we definitely saw, no matter the size of the law firm, was salaries is obviously one of the biggest expenses for law firms. But it varies based on the size of the law firm, of course, and whether or not you're actually paying partners on top of a salary. So that's the first question is how are you paying yourself and the people within your firm? And then there were two other areas of spending that we dived into as a part of this report, and that was marketing spend and technology spend. And what we found is that law firms really aren't spending a lot annually on this.
Oh,
So
really?
about 5% on average of a law firm's spending is on marketing, and 2% or less of a law firm's annual spend is on technology. Now,
Oh,
it has grown over time. And if we look at spending patterns as published by the US Census Bureau, law firm spending on software and marketing has increased faster than revenue in these spaces, right? It's just growing a little bit faster. But even with that growth over time, it's still only 5% and 2%. Now, one of the things that jumped out from us, though, is that was the average. When we looked at firms that were spending just a little bit more, so around 7% of their annual budget on marketing and like 2 to 3% of their
mhm.
annual budget on technology, those firms were actually showing a 21% increase in profit.
Wow.
Yeah. And so a really huge return on investment for these firms that are making smart decisions on how to market themselves and how to
Mhm.
leverage technology internally to increase that utilization rate that we're talking about, the amount of time they get to spend each day on billable work.
I love the fact that you mentioned about that, like the strategically doing it, because I often talk to a lot of firms and have to emphasize to them just spending more on marketing doesn't mean you're automatically going to get better results. It has to be a strategic, I guess you say, investment, the way that you go about it. And I would say that's pretty shocking when you hear, like I said, those trends about 5% and 2%, and even the ones who win a little bit more, 7 and 3, because a lot of times when I look at, I guess you'd say, some of the publicly published data, or let me say, publicly published opinions about spending trends,
Yeah.
because they don't usually tend to have the data behind it. They usually say, oh, firms spend anywhere from 10 to 20 time, 10 to 20% on marketing. I always wonder, okay, what data are they looking at? Because when I look at law firms, I'm not seeing those numbers.
No. And I think that kind of leads us into the next segment, which is the secret shopper we did this year. So, as part of our survey, we asked firms, like, where are you getting your clients? And
Mhm.
overwhelmingly, it's referrals. That was number one. Word of mouth is where law firms are getting their clients. The second place they're getting their clients is from their website, people coming to them online to find a lawyer to help with them. And that led us to taking a look at our law firms really setting themselves up well for word of mouth and client intake. We hired a secret shopper firm. We targeted 500 randomly selected law firms. So I can't tell you who they are. I
Yeah.
know they weren't all Clio customers. And then we wrote out targeted inquiries from potential clients aimed at different practice areas. So the
Mhm.
secret shopper would go and research the law firm and figure out what they did, and then use one of the scripts we provided. So if they were a family law firm, it was a family law query. If it was a criminal defense attorney, it was a criminal defense question. And we had 5 different practice areas. And we
Okay.
asked the secret shoppers to look at the company's website, to try reaching out via phone, via email, via chatbot, or contact us forms, depending on what was there, right? And to rate the experience. And things did not go well. To be perfectly honest, law firms are telling us that they rely on this positive word of mouth to bring in new business. But 73% of our secret shoppers said they would not recommend the law firm that they were assigned.
Wow.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was just an instantly bad experience for them. For the firms that were able to like reach out to somebody and get response, the most successful channel, the most highly rated interactions happened when somebody picked up the phone, right? When they
Oh.
called and picked up the phone. The one that surprised me was the second most positive channel was chatbot. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And that kind of made sense to me because when you're interacting with a chatbot on a law firm's website, there's always somebody answering. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily a person, but you can ask questions, right? You can get answers, and it doesn't matter the time of day. They're there and available. When we surveyed clients about law firms using chatbots on their website, over 51% said, yeah, it's actually a really good starting point when looking into law firms. But 61% said they view a positive chatbot experience as leading to an in person conversation,
Okay.
right? And so chatbots, I think, really help with people being able to identify, is this the right type of law firm? Hey, I'm looking for a divorce. Do you handle divorces? Yes or
Mm.
no? And a lot of law firms just don't put that information on their website, or at least not in a way that is understandable
Yeah.
by clients. Lawyers write for lawyers. We've got to learn to do better about that. But yeah, you can find out, does the law firm handle your type of cases? Does the law firm let you pay by credit card? And
Mhm.
then this is that positive experience that they're looking. Can I schedule an appointment? And we found that law firms that are using tools like online scheduling actually have 51% more leads and 52% more revenue
Wow.
than
That's
firms that
impressive.
aren't using those types of online schedulers in Clio software. So it was online scheduler, online intake forms, and local service ads, which is a service offered by Google, where they offer up ads based on locale as well as the search terms. And all of that, and those plug into the Clio Grow tool. And so firms that were using all three of those, 51% more leads, 52% more revenue. So
Wow.
it's really interesting to see how the secret shopper experience of I want to be able to talk to somebody, I want to get some answers, I want to do it quickly, which we found
Mhm.
just wasn't happening a lot of the times. You can turn to technology and we can see like in our data the positive results that come from having certain types of technology for prospective clients.
I think that makes a lot of sense when, as you were talking, I was thinking about it. It's like if you consider a person who's reaching out to a law firm, typically something has gone wrong, or they need help protecting something, or they
Yeah.
need help getting through a situation and not getting feedback, or not getting a response, or not being able to get information that kind of guides them to the next step could really turn a person off. And it makes sense that if they can hop on and ask a chatbot some questions and actually get relevant responses from the chatbot, like that just heightens their interest in the experience that they're having, because they're like, hey, I feel like I'm making progress towards a solution to why I even decided to reach out to a lawyer.
Yeah, we even saw for firms that were using these tools a difference in conversion rate and time to hire. So, conversion rate is a sales or a marketing term where did you just get them to buy something? Did they convert from a potential client to an actual client? And what we found is certain features actually made that more likely to happen. Online scheduler definitely helped. E signatures actually were a really big help with that as well. And that one totally makes sense to me because I don't want to sign anything and have to scan it and send it back. And I have access to a really good scanner and I still don't want to do it. Much less somebody who's, wait, I have to print this out. I don't have a printer. Then I have to scan it. I don't have a scanner or I have to fax it. What? Who has a fax? No. And so e-signature just increased the conversion rate. It also decreased the time to hire. And firms that were using e-signature, firms that were using online scheduler and online intake forms just got hired faster because it clipped things along. And since we did that, we actually added in some new automation features in Clio Grow to where rather than somebody fills out a form and then you log in the next morning, you read the form and you like do the
Mhm.
next step, you can actually program in certain things like they've completed the form. So now let's email them a link to a consultation scheduler. Yeah. And it can click these things along. So I'm actually expecting us to see firms that aren't just using these features, but also using the automation in between them to just really have a decreased time to hire. Yeah, it's really amazing the little things you can pick out in this data and these reports.
Yeah, and I think it's when you take a step back and you think about it from a consumer's perspective, like it makes a lot of sense because just the other day, someone sent me a form for a contract that they wanted me to sign. And then they
Mhm.
also needed like banking information and they sent it in PDF and it wasn't like I could electronically fill it out. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable sharing this information and then scanning it back to you. I'm like, is there a more secure way to do this or an electronic way? And I'm like, it makes so much sense when you have those things in your process. Like, it probably helps the sales process go a lot smoother.
It definitely does. And again, it's not something that lawyers are trained to think about, right? We're trained to read cases. We're trained to look at issues and fact patterns. We're not trained to be sales and marketing experts. And so the fact that we can see for law firms in particular what works and doesn't is, I think, a really big bonus from being able to publish the legal trends report.
Nice. I would say as we begin to wrap up, I know that you get to been working really hard on the trends reports. Now, is there anything about the trends report that the team talks about? Hey, we added the financial data, we added the secret shopper experience, we brought that back again. Any other types of things that the team has maybe thought about doing or anything that's already in the works of like things that people possibly could expect to see in new or I guess future trends reports?
Absolutely. Artificial intelligence is a buzzword topic right now, but I don't think we can ignore it as a part of the legal profession or the legal trends report. When we started asking law firms, are they using AI back in 2023, about 1 in 5 lawyers said they were. Now it's 4 out of 5 lawyers are saying they're using AI in some way. And so it's out there. It's a part of the legal practice, whether we like it or not. And so one of the things that we're researching as a part of the Legal Trends Report is how's that going to impact a law firm's finances to use these types of tools? For our 2024 Legal Trends Report, we took a look at a statistic published by McKinsey where they said 40% of legal work and 44% of legal workers could be automated using generative AI. And that number, could we confirm or disprove it? They used a data classification system that's published as part of the government in the US called ONET, the Occupational Information Network. And all it really does is it takes a look at work activities, things like move heavy objects or records information, right? And then it breaks them down by industry and profession into more and more detailed descriptions. Records information is a work activity. And for lawyers, one of the detailed work activities from that is prepares a legal document. And as I'm reading up on the McKinsey study and trying to see can we prove or disprove it, I'm digging into this ONET information. And I just recognize that these detailed work activity descriptions look a lot like time entries. I prepared a legal
Mhm.
document. I made an appearance in a trial. I interviewed witnesses, like all of these different things. So we have time entries. And so what
Mhm.
we did was we took 7 million
Wow.
anonymized time entries and we built our own large language learning model internally, which is technical talk for AI, and asked it to take a look at these time entries and classify them against these ONET detailed work activities. So I wrote a motion for blah, 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 blah. And that's prepared a legal document. And then after we classified these 7 million time entries, then we asked the same LLM to rate the automation potential of
Mhm.
those work activities. Interestingly, preparing legal documents is about 86% automatable,
Wow.
which kind of makes sense,
That's a big
right?
impact.
Yeah. When you're talking about the fact that generative AI can just create text with the right setup, can create text in the right format or the right spacing, the preparing a legal document is highly automatable. And there were two takeaways from when we reviewed 7 million time entries. The first of which is there was no work activity that's specific to lawyers that didn't have some degree of automation potential. Preparing legal documents and recording information had the highest, was both the most frequent and had the highest automation potential. So no work activity had no automation potential. But secondly, no work activity had 100% automation potential, right? The highest, preparing legal documents, was 86% automatable. And so that tells me that we can be more efficient in the work that we're doing, but it's never going to be automated away. So that's
Gotcha.
good. But if we're recording our time spent on these things, right? If I automate 86% of my billable time when I'm drafting documents away, right? How am I going to get by on 14%? What I previously was billing at 100%. In
Mhm.
fact, when we looked at our actual time entries, the if everything's automated to its fullest extent possible, the average lawyer is going to lose about $27,000
Wow.
in revenue per year due to automation. Now, that's not, you are going to lose that. That's worst case scenario, best case scenario, depending on how you
Okay.
look at it. And so we just need to ask ourselves, like, how do we run a law firm and use artificial intelligence to the best of its capability? For that, we think flat fees is going to be a huge part of it, hybrid billing. And one of the reasons we say that is when we surveyed law firms and asked them, not just are they using AI, but how much have they adopted it? Is it just a little
Mhm.
bit, or is it widely? Is it universal? And then we also asked, do you charge an entire matter in flat fees? And what we found is the largest group of people who were charging in flat fees were also the most widely adopting AI law firms. And
That
that
makes
just
sense.
makes, yeah, it does when you think about it, right? Like a lot of the
Mhm.
conclusions of the legal trends report are obvious, but we just
Mhm.
it's only after you see it together. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense, right? If I'm going to get paid $2,000 to help with a driving under the influence plea and the process is highly automatable, then the less time I spend on that, the more profit my law firm makes,
Mhm.
which is exactly the opposite of an hourly billing model where the more
Mhm.
time I spend on something, the more profit my law firm makes. And so I think we're going to see just a further increased use of flat fees. They're already about 19% of the average of all revenue for law firms. They actually make up about 15% of solo and small law firm matters,
Oh, wow.
right? And we're expecting to see that increase over time.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying every firm's going to go to flat fee, but I think there are going to be more and more use of flat fees either per segment of
Mhm.
certain types of matters, right? We see this in criminal defense attorneys where they're like, I'll do the arraignment and maybe a plea bargain, right? $5,000 to $10,000. If we go to trial, though, now it goes hourly. I think we're going
Yeah.
to see more and more of those types of matters and billing occur across law firms of all different sizes and different practice areas, much more so than we've ever seen in the past.
Nice. It is definitely going to be an exciting time. And yeah, I think for law firms, that is why I think the value of having the data, because as you said, some of the things that you find in the data and do once you see it is okay, that makes sense. But I do think the data helps spark that idea or helps turn the light on for those things. So it'll be interesting to see how the legal profession navigates that with the further adoption of AI and how that impacts pricing. I just want to say, Josh, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for really shining a brighter light on the great things that the team is doing and what you're finding in the data. So, for people that want to get a copy of it, can you tell them like where can they go to actually get a copy of the trends report to dive in and see some of the findings for themselves?
Absolutely. You just swing by Clio's website. It's Clio.com. So that's Clio.com /LTR, which is short for Legal Trends Report. So Clio.com /LTR. You can download all of our reports for free. You don't have to be a customer. And I do recommend taking a look at not just our most recent ones, but we tell different stories and look at different issues throughout the year. And so the past ones are just as great to read as well. And you'll be able to see changes over time, which I think is really interesting.
Awesome. And I can attest to those past ones have been very helpful because as we hire new staff members, one of the things that we do assign to them as they start is some of the prior trends reports
Oh, wow.
is for them to actually go because if we're going to provide bookkeeping CFO work to law firms, like we want to understand the industry we're supporting. And it's been very cool to see like our new staff members read some of the trends reports, the things that they find, so that they become a little bit more familiar with the legal industry as they become part of our team. So, thank you. Please express my gratitude to the team and to the company for putting all the hard work in to create these trends reports.
Thank you. I'm glad you're finding them useful. It's a bit of a labor of love for me because a lot of this is questions that I just wish I had the answers to when I was starting out. What should I charge? And it just didn't exist. There was no place to go to find like an actual answer for this. You could talk to a couple people and hope they knew what they were doing, but now we can actually see like how it works and how other law firms are being successful so that we can all be successful together.
Awesome. I love it. Joshua, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being another amazing guest.
I look forward to our next conversation soon.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Law Firm and Finance Show, where we give you great content that helps you build a more successful law firm. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on all platforms and follow us for more content.